I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I am Dean Detloff.
And I'm Matt Bernico, and it's still Halloween, but I don't have any more characters to be.
It's still Halloween, and, well, as of the time that we're recording this, it's not even quite Halloween, and I have to admit, I don't even know what character I'm going to be, and it is important that I figure it out, because I'm going trick-or-treating with a baby on Sunday, and that means I get all the candy, but I do feel like I have to earn it a little bit. Not my baby, to be clear, but someone else's baby.
That's the best situation. You can go trick-or-treating with a baby. That baby can't eat any of the candy. Hey, my son is allergic to peanuts, and I'm going to take all of his candy.
Nice.
Just going to put that out there right now. Yeah.
Sorry.
You can have the Smarties. I'll tell him.
Man, Halloween is so fun. My partner Emily was a nanny for a long time. We got to learn about lots of different ways that people do Halloween. And one of my favorites was she worked for this family where the rule was they could eat as much candy as they possibly want on Halloween, but that's it. So it's like you can eat as much as your stomach can possibly handle that one day, and then after that, it's all gone. And so they just eat themselves sick, and then it's over. I think that is the best, just like a child bacchanal. You can have it all, and then good luck.
That rules. I love that. Man, so I live in St. Louis. People know this about me. It's not a secret. In St. Louis, the local tradition here is that before people give you candy, you have to tell them a Halloween joke.
Whoa.
I know.
I like
a
that.
lot riding on it. Yeah, so Lewis and I, we've been trying to drum up our best jokes, and I gotta tell you, 6-year-olds aren't great joke tellers. So I've been having to feed him a lot of lines, and I think by the time Sunday rolls around, though, he's gonna be ready.
You can give him a good Norm Macdonald joke, so every house takes 10 minutes.
That's a good idea. Yeah, we'll really stretch it out. Yeah, right now we're going with. Well, here I'm gonna try it out on you, Dean.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. What's a ghost's favorite dinner?
A ghost's favorite dinner. Man, I'm trying to think of a food that rhymes with boo. You're gonna have to give it to me.
Spaghetti.
That's good. That one will earn you some Smarties for sure.
I feel like there's some other options. You could go with lasagna. That'd be good too.
Lasagna. Yeah.
It's gotta be a pasta though, because ghosts historically do love pasta.
Blueberry pie.
Yeah, that's one too, I guess.
This podcast, what's happened to it? This is where we're at now.
I don't know.
All right. Halloween, it's great, but we're not talking about Halloween this time around, unfortunately. I wish we were. Instead, we're talking about something, I guess the connection is that it is very scary, which is evangelicalism and its relationship to Donald Trump and Christianity and so on. Recently, you might have seen this article in The Atlantic by Peter Weiner, who is a conservative character we can talk more about later. He published this essay there called "The Evangelical Church is Breaking Apart." And it is something. The subtitle of the article is "Christians Must Reclaim Jesus from His Church," which, I don't know. We could talk more about that thesis, but the article definitely made the rounds on Twitter. It's, I don't know, there's some stuff that is good about it, kind of trying to figure out what's going on in evangelicalism, but it is also a really weird contextualizing piece that's trying to kind of say something editorially as well, so it's not just reporting or something like that. So what's really interesting about it is that it's sort of a gesture toward coming to terms with the ways that evangelicalism has really gotten out of hand since Donald Trump, right? And it has kind of, however you want to put it, it's metastasized, it's mutating, it's transforming. That part is true. But it's an article that's trying to figure out what has gone wrong with evangelicalism from the perspective of evangelicals. And I think this is almost like a new genre of take that is emerging in the last year, right? I mean, it was happening under Trump for sure, but now under Biden, I think a lot of evangelicals are just trying to figure out how to rebrand or how to make sense of what has happened in their own tradition and so on. And this is a pretty, I don't know, like a good representative take of how evangelicals are processing their own mistakes, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in this article for sure. And I think most of the analysis is wrong because it mistakes culture for politics. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I do have to say, if you haven't read it, you should maybe go take a look at it. I'm always hesitant to suggest people read anything by a conservative, but this one is really entertaining, at least. Again, like I said, the analysis is all wrong, but but Weiner goes and interviews all of these like Christian, people and pastors about their churches, and they're all complaining about how their congregants are upset about them being too woke. And I think that's super funny. It's just like, all these dumb pastors who did in large part help create this problem. Now they're suffering from it as well. And I love to see that.
Yeah, it's really rough. It's like very weird to read. Rough in the sense that, I don't know, it's almost like disturbingly naive at certain points. And, I understand, like, listen, I'm a Roman Catholic. I get it. Like, I'm speaking from a pretty shiny glass house for sure. But there is something, I don't know, very unique about how evangelicals sort out what they're doing and how they think about what they're doing and so on. I have to admit, maybe this is going to come out in the episode, I have kind of a soft spot for evangelicals, I guess because I had a brief time of being one, and maybe I just like don't want to be hard on myself. I'm like protecting myself by by creating some kind of sympathy or something. But nevertheless, it is still surprising to me in 2021 that you can be a very big shot, rich commentator and still kind of have the opinions that Peter Weiner seems to be gleaning from this situation.
Yeah, I agree. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at this big article from Peter Weiner. Again, it's called "The Evangelical Church is Breaking Apart." You can read it in the Atlantic. It's a hefty article, but it's been everywhere on social media. So you can participate in this cultural moment by going to read it and then listening to us talk about it, or just listen to us talk about it. That's fine too. You don't have to. We're not making you read it. We're not your teachers.
I wouldn't have read it if Matt didn't tell me to.
All right. So we're going to take a look at this article, maybe from the perspective of like. As anthropologists or people in cultural studies, maybe not as evangelicals ourselves, obviously, but I think that's the right perspective to think through this piece because if you do it from that perspective, maybe a dispassionate, well, not that dispassionate, but a more analytical framework, start to see some of the very weird pathologies in conservative thinking and why they inevitably can't get their own diagnosis right and why they keep kind of making they keep making these like sort of situations that they get caught up in. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a look at all of this. And if you're thinking why are we doing any of this, I think it's actually worth paying attention to articles like this every now and again for two reasons. Number one, it's evidence of the Christian right trying to rehabilitate itself after being like internally decimated by the brainworms of Donald Trump. Like all this like weird stuff about woke politics and all of the weird like QAnon stuff that's kind of blend into like the evangelical Christian milieu. This is I think a really important piece of making people on the outside of that community maybe like think that like they're recovering or gain some new semblance of respect for people trying to sort out their problems or whatever. But I think if we look at it really closely, you can see that really they're up to the same thing again. There's nothing really that new about this. Okay, so anyways, we want to be mindful when the Christian right is trying to get an upper hand again. Don't let them do that. It's bad. This is the class war after all. And number two, articles like this are always trying to parse out like what went wrong in evangelicalism. But rightly understood, I think it's clear that we've got here is not anything that's an aberration of evangelicalism. It's not something that like is a fork in the road and it just took the wrong path or something. But I think instead this is maybe like the logical conclusion of evangelicalism. What you see here is what it looks like when evangelicalism kind of comes to a hard stop and just kind of spins its wheels in the mud. So I think we have these two things to consider. On the one hand, it's people on the Christian right trying to make themselves not look so silly after all this Donald Trump stuff. And number two, you see kind of like where evangelicalism ends. Like this is like the ghost of Christmas future for evangelicalism or something. So I think it's worth talking about and kind of getting into the weeds with some of it here. This is a pretty hefty article, so it might mean we have to read a little bit on the air, and hopefully that doesn't bother you. But before we go any further, let me tell you a little bit about Peter Weiner. We don't need to say much about him. He's a conservative guy. He writes for The Atlantic. He writes for the New York Times. He has been a part of conservative think tanks. You can look them all up, and it's boring and kind of annoying.
He created one, I think, like a Christian think tank or something.
I think that's right. Yeah, something about like an ethics think tank. But most notably, in his he was in politics for a while. He was a speechwriter for Reagan and both of the Bushes. So I want to get that out there so you know what kind of person we're dealing with when they seem to be sort of like having a moment of moral clarity in this article. They're not really. they're not. It's all for show.
Well, we can. It's good to actually pull that connection out too, right? Because the article is published in the Atlantic, where also, for example, people like David Frum are editors, right? So there's kind of a Bush speechwriters alumni club sometimes that you get at the Atlantic, and it's really revealing of how there's a certain, I don't know what it is, like exculpatory narrative that gets told over and over again by these folks as they kind of try to like narrate their way out of complicity with the problems that are happening in the world, right? So David Frum, if you don't know, he was a speechwriter for Bush who famously coined the phrase "the axis of evil" to try to sell, to try to like brand the Iraq War in speeches for George Bush. And ever since then, David Frum is like an anti-Trump conservative or whatever, but is apparently unable to make the connection that maybe lying to a bunch of people about a war that we shouldn't have gone to, like, has something to do with shaping conservative sentiment downstream, right? And you get the same thing with Peter Weiner, right? This is a guy who wrote speeches for Reagan, the sort of real power drive of neoliberalism, and then later on ended up again writing for the other evangelical in chief, George Bush. So anyway, I just point that out to say this is a pattern that you get a lot in sort of the commentariat of people who were in politics, and it's important not to let those people off the hook, but to say, look, you bear some responsibility for this, and you can't just kind of highbrow your way out of that kind of blood on your hands or something.
Yeah, that's right. The axis of evil, in case you weren't alive for that particular political moment or aren't old enough to remember, the axis of evil is Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, I believe.
Just extremely normal allies, all part of the same very tight axis.
Yeah, historically extremely allied with one another. Pretty bonkers. Man, that's a whole thing to talk about in and of itself. Okay, so this article opens up with this actually fantastically hilarious story, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it would take a minute. It would take a while to kind of parse it all out. But let me tell you just the overview of the beginning, and then we'll kind of get into it here. So the article starts off with this story about the election of elders at an evangelical church in Northern Virginia. It's a mega church. Okay, there you go. It's called McLean Bible Church, I guess is the actual name. And I'm not just adding them here on this podcast to be mean, but because it'll come to play in a second. Anyways, so Weiner's telling the story about the election of these elders, and basically there's this kind of like big scuffle within the church during the sort of voting time, where some rumors were spread that a few things, that some of the elders that were going to be like elected here or confirmed in this particular church, they were too woke. They were left of center. They were pushing a social justice agenda, all of this kind of stuff. But also more egregiously, there's a rumor that that three of the individuals who were nominated to be elders were advocating to sell their main church building to Muslims and convert it into a mosque. Okay, I'm not. Listen, I'm a very serious podcaster here. I'm not laughing. Okay. So anyways, yeah, so you have these claims about wokeness, you have claims about the mosque, and one congregant in an email that was like circulating around the congregation said, this is a quote from a congregant: MBC is no longer McLean Bible Church, it's now
Nice.
Melanin Bible Church. Some real racist bullshit. I hate this. Okay. That's where it stops being funny, and it's it's just bad. Or maybe it's funny in a very cynical kind of way. Okay. So anyways, you have this story. This is kind of how the whole thing opens up. And Weiner is like, what is going on in these churches? Why are people being this way? How is it that all these people have come to be so like begrudgingly political and so like backbiting and whatever? That's what he's kind of getting into. He goes on to say this, and this kind of sets the tone for the rest of it. Influential figures such as the theologian Russell Moore and the Bible teacher Beth Moore felt compelled to leave the Southern Baptist Convention. Both were targeted by right-wing elements within the SBC. The Christian Post, an online evangelical newspaper, published an op-ed by one of its contributors criticizing religious conservatives like Platt, Russell Moore, Beth Moore, Ed Stetzer, the executive of Wheaton Bible College, Billy Graham Center, as progressive Christian figures who commonly champion leftist ideology. In a matter of months, 4 pastors resigned from Bethlehem Baptist Church, a flagship church in Minneapolis. One of those pastors, Brian Pickering, cited mistreatment by elders, domineering leadership, bullying, and spiritual abuse and toxic culture. Political conflicts are hardly the whole reason for this turmoil, but according to news accounts, they played a significant role, particularly on matters having to do with race. So you have this one big story about these this wild church electing elders, but then you have this larger trend that he's trying to draw out here, that all of these other sort of conservative Christian people are starting to leave their conventions, leaving their denominations, leaving their churches. They're coming forward about toxic culture and whatnot. And that's what's going on. That's the phenomena that this article is trying to tackle. Dean, before we go any further, what do you think? What's going?
Yeah, it is wild. I mean, well, it's interesting to read this article. I read it today in light of some recent stuff that's been going on at my alma mater, the evangelical school I went to for my bachelor's degree. Cornerstone University.
That's a great example, yeah.
In Grand Rapids, Michigan. It used to be a Baptist school, and then it was like a non-denominational evangelical school. So like when I went there, I started in 2008. The big news was that people were allowed to dance on campus like a couple years before I had come there. So it was that kind of place. Anyway, while I was there, it was a pretty like run-of-the-mill regular evangelical school. I don't know. Everything that you think about evangelicalism is there at that school. But very recently they got a new president, and this particular president has like published his own kind of anti-woke agenda manifesto, even using all this language, right? Like talking about race issues, intentionally rolling back like diversity hires or like diversity policies and so on. And a bunch of professors like either resigned or were fired. There's like a huge kind of controversy happening at the university right now. And it's fascinating to watch because like Cornerstone, it sort of relies on evangelicalism's ability to be like, I don't know, like really like simmering under the surface, but like very boring on the face of it, right? Like that's how a lot of evangelical communities are. You might get some, like when in 2008, when I was there and Obama was elected, like there were students who like genuinely thought the apocalypse was happening, right? Like that was like a real thing. But the school itself was not like, I don't know, extremely like right wing in its public facing way. I mean, it was right wing as a school, right? But like it wasn't trying to sort of play a political hand or something in an overt sense. So anyway, now it's kind of reckoning with this exactly this rift that this article is talking about, right? And like you can look at its Facebook, for example, and there's like on the Cornerstone Facebook, there's post after post about like how the sports teams are doing, and like they don't have any engagement. And then there's like a post about this president's inauguration, and there are like almost 200 comments. So it's probably like a PR intern's worst nightmare at Cornerstone University right now. But it's exactly this, right? It's like there are all these accusations that like these dangerous CU professors have become too left wing, and to be fair, like some of them are, right? Some of them are left wing, but the people that they actually accuse are like past presidents, right? Like extremely right wing people, or like, I don't know, administrative teams that are like centrist at the very best, right? So all that to say, I think there is kind of a moment happening, right? There is a real shakeup going on in evangelicalism, and that is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, totally. So, earlier I said that this gets the diagnosis
Right.
wrong, but this is not the part that it gets wrong. This is the part that is right. Yeah. I'm also as you're telling that story, Dean, I'm desperately trying not to commit the sin where I really like that bad things are happening to them, but but I'm failing desperately. So pray for me about that, I guess. But I'm enjoying it at this very moment. Okay. Cool. So this is a real phenomena. I mean, you can imagine. It makes a lot of sense, right? The culture war is real, and like it's sorry, the culture war is real, but it's all kind of directed at sort of fake, made up things. So to see them bleed out into the spaces that are dominated by right wing people like evangelical churches is not super surprising. And when you are mad about a made up thing, like, I don't know, critical race theory or being too woke or whatever, you can, just say anyone is guilty of that. So it's easy. It's a great space for it. So pretty cool. All right. So here's the thesis of the piece here. And we can kind of tie these things together because they're all interrelated. So Peter Weiner says, the aggressive, disruptive, and unforgiving mindset that characterizes so much of our politics has found a home in many American churches. As a person of the Christian faith who has spent most of their adult life attending evangelical churches, I wanted to understand the splintering of churches, communities, and relationships. The root of the discord lies in the fact that many Christians have embraced the worst aspects of our culture and our politics. When the Christian faith is politicized, Christians become repositories not of grace, but of grievances. Places where tribal identities are reinforced, where fears are nurtured, and where aggression and nastiness are sacralized. The result is not only wounding the nation, it's having a devastating impact on Christian faith. Okay. So that's it. That's what he thinks is at the the heart of the discord. It's that Christians have just embraced the worst aspects of culture and politics, and man, that's a bad thing for religion. This kind of doesn't even imagine that maybe religion is tied up in that as well, but that's maybe the point. I mean, like I said at the beginning, the article is sort of a mixed bag, right? On the one hand, the analysis is completely off base and it's kind of mistaking one thing for another, but it does note something helpful, right? Evangelicalism is not even is not monolithic even, right? And some of these communities have internal tensions. I mean, we're probably guilty of this as much as anybody on the left, but like evangelical churches are not just uniformly conservative. They have like all these like very bizarre, raging and roiling conservative factions within them that, are often at odds with one another. And that's actually quite interesting too, to see how that all plays out. That's a very diplomatic and like, and academic way of saying, I love to see these people.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting too, though, to trace how some of those differences or disagreements have developed over even the course of our own lifetime, I guess, the things that we have direct experience with, right? Like when I was at Cornerstone, I feel like the big cultural boogeyman of evangelicalism was postmodernism. That was the big thing. So it was like there are people out there who are out to get you, and they believe in relativism, or they think there's no such thing as truth, or whatever it might be, right? And then at the same time, there was kind of an evangelical movement of people reading postmodern stuff or like postmodern theologies and so on, but like in a conservative kind of way, right? Trying to think through whatever, I don't know, like whatever this cottage industry of church and postmodern philosophers were doing. There was like all kinds of publishing wings set up. Some of them still exist, I guess, to kind of churn out like book after book about why postmodernism and evangelicalism are fine. So like that kind of difference, which is basically a conversation internal mostly to conservatives. I think I think there's more to be said about evangelicalism. It is an extremely weird thing, and there is such a thing, I want to say, as a progressive
Totally.
kind of evangelicalism. Maybe we could talk more about that much later, but on the whole, right, it is a conversation among conservatives. And all that to say, now, those same kind of tensions are like ratcheted up 1,000-fold, but it's not postmodernism anymore. It's critical race theory, right? Which is like a term that no evangelical knew 4 years ago, had never heard in their entire life, right? And obviously, like race, I think we've talked about this with 100 experts on the show in the past, right? Race has always been part of the construction of evangelical identity and so on. But to kind of make it so obvious and to put it front and center in the way that evangelicals have now, I think has created like a real situation, a kind of rift situation that, you know, in the past, these might have been like dramatic tensions. And in some cases, you know, they were quite dramatic. But there's almost like a schism happening in evangelicalism on the whole that maybe wasn't as much of a fissure 10 years ago or something. It's so hard to talk about because it's like, you know, like when Obama was elected, there was tons of evangelical racism, right? Lots of evangelical white supremacy coming out of the woodwork. So I don't want to like create the impression that, okay, 10 years ago, everyone was just talking about like relativism and like now they're talking about race. Like that's not the case, but there's something like, I don't even know how to put it. I don't, like all the adjectives that come to mind are not quite right. Like I want to say it's like uglier, but that's not true. It was ugly like 10 years ago. I want to say more dangerous, but that's also not true because this is also sort of the fruit of that very dangerous thing that happened. But I do think that there's something sort of, you know what it is? This is what it is. In Marxist materialist philosophy, there's this kind of sort of way of talking about how quantitative problems can become qualitative problems, where like if two cars run into each other at an intersection, that's like, you know, a bad coincidence, a bad accident. But like if 100 cars run into each other at that intersection over the course of a week, well, that's like a structural problem. Like the numerical problem becomes like a qualitative problem. And obviously like racism has always been a qualitative problem in evangelicalism, but it's almost like the pile up is just like piling up more and more and more, such that, you know, we're like way beyond the point where you could even install a traffic light or something if ever that was possible, right? Like it's just a disaster, a very, very bad car accident.
A good metaphor. I appreciate it. Okay. So that there's a lot going on there, and we'll kind of come back to it more in a minute. But the theme that Dean just kind of brought out here too, that like you couldn't even add a traffic stop, that wouldn't help, I think is actually a really important one, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, but Peter Weiner, a guy, a conservative intellectual, if you will, I guess I will. When you write this kind of pieces, you have to make an account for like the ways that religion and politics, you know, either go together or don't go together, or like how they're oriented in the world. You know, there's sort of like a methodological kind of part of all of these types of articles, and they're usually the part that are most egregiously wrong. And this article is no exception. So I'm going to read this piece here that kind of knits together the way that Weiner thinks that kind of politics and religion might sit. And it's actually, I think, very bizarre. Okay, so he says this. How is it that evangelical Christianity has become, for too many of its adherents, a political religion? The historian George Marsden told me that political loyalties can sometimes be so strong that they create a religious-like faith that overrides or even
This is the
transforms
first time
a
I'm
more
hearing
traditional
this.
religious faith. You don't say. I've never heard this before. Okay. Now, this next sentence is a really challenging one, and I don't know, I'm going to have a hard time getting through it again. The United States has largely avoided the most virulent expressions of such political religions. None has succeeded for very long, at least until
Bush
now.
speechwriter himself says the U.S. has avoided the most virulent expressions of such political religions.
It is bonkers. I have no idea how you can actually believe this statement is true. And I have no idea how anyone I mean, I guess I know how someone at the Atlantic would let this slide, but like, are you kidding me? It's such a bonkers way to think about religion because it presupposes religion and politics and culture is like these like sort of separate domains, these perfect spherical bubbles that just do not often, eclipse one another or something. But that's clearly not the case. I mean, I don't know. I mean, as a speechwriter for, two Bushes and Reagan, like, who was alive for the proud pronouncement of so many evangelicals of Barack Hussein Obama. You can't forget the Hussein. Like, I mean, like that's it. Like, that's the anti-Muslim sentiment of so many evangelicals during that Obama moment is like, how could you possibly miss that? How could you not think that is not also a pretty virulent expression of political religion? It is just such a bonkers way to think. I mean, not to mention every other every other example of this, like the ways that Christianity underpins the genocide of indigenous people or of like chattel slavery of black people. Like, I mean, come on. You've got to be kidding me. Like, read a book.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, just the profound irony of being a person who wrote speeches for Bush, who, like, like, there are speeches where George Bush literally says, like, it's us, the Christian West, versus everyone else, right? Like, it is literally a theocratic attempt to rule the United States. Like, I don't know, it's so, like, intentionally stupid to say something like this if you have that kind of background. And, the one nice thing about this article is, like, sometimes I feel bad, like, dunking on people who are, like, well-meaning but naive or whatever, but I do not feel that way about Peter Weiner. Like, this is just, like, you have to go out of your way to be foolish enough to say something like, well, I don't know, like, I talked to George Marsden, the historian, and he told me, like, sometimes people let their politics get in the way of their religion, and, like, that was news to me. It's like, who are you? Just the weirdest uncle at your your Thanksgiving dinner who's like, this is the first time hearing of it. I don't know.
Talk to a second historian.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think it's very bad. That's the hot take, I guess, about this. But I think it's also interesting, too, because, like, evangelicalism does have this weird contradiction internal to it where, like, on the one hand, it sees faith as a kind of, it does see it as a separate domain, right? It's like, I'm coming back to the heart of worship, it's just you and Jesus. You're there in the moment of the altar call with the spotlight on you, right? It's just you and God. There's this kind of privatization that happens. But on the other hand, it's that private moment that actually enables this, like, overwhelmingly public expression of what it means to be a Christian, to kind of live out that, like, your fidelity to that private commitment or whatever it might be. Such that, like, your whole life becomes a matter of figuring out whether or not something is Christian or not, right? Like, you get upset if Starbucks doesn't have a Christmas tree on their cup or whatever, because, that's secularism on the rise, So it's like, Peter Weiner wants you to believe that he's never heard of the Left Behind books, right? Like, it's that kind of thing that you're like, okay, this is extremely duplicitous. Like, somebody is lying to you in this article, and it is definitely the person who wrote speeches for George W. Bush.
That's right. Okay, so let's bracket that for a moment. I mean, not too bracketed, but let's just come back to it later, because it kind of undergirds the rest of this. But all right, say we're to believe Peter Weiner, and this is actually the most the time when politics and religion are most egregiously mixed up. Why would that be, do you think? So it's Donald Trump. That's why he thinks that's the case. So it's not evangelicalism. It's not, it's not the internal logics of Christianity or the fascist desire of the masses or, like, whatever. It's just that Donald Trump was president. He made it worse. And, like, that's kind of what we have to deal with here. Yeah. So this is a quick addition to the conversation that Weiner had with George Marsden about this whole thing. So this is a quote from Marsden. Okay. When Trump was able to add open hatred and resentment to the political religious stance of true believers, it crossed a line, said Marsden. Tribal instincts seemed, I deeply do not like when people say the word tribal to mean something bad. I think that's extremely frustrating. Okay. Just want to get that out there. Tribal instincts seem to have become overwhelming. The dominance of political religion over professed religion is seen in how, for many, the loyalty to Trump became a blind allegiance. The result is that many Christian followers of Trump have come to see the gospel of hatred, resentment, vilification, put downs, and insults as the expression of their Christianity for which they too should be willing to fight. Okay, so George Marsden, he thinks that Donald Trump is kind of at the base of some of this. And okay, is he wrong? Yes. Trump is not at the base of the bad things in evangelicalism that we're seeing right now. But Trump is also not unrelated to the particular mutations I think that you see within evangelicalism right now. And I think that's like worth saying, right? I think that a lot of, I mean, for no other reason that the Trump regime pumped in, you know, a gazillion dollars into social media to kind of like convince people of these new vocabulary words. I mean, I think that you have to recognize that Trump is not innocent in any of this for sure, right? Of course he's there, and the way that he kind of partnered with so many very bizarre evangelical people and even Christians who are not evangelical are really important. But I don't think that's like the root of the problem, as this article.
Yeah, I mean, figuring
posits.
out Trump's functional relationship to evangelicalism, I think, is something that is going to take people a long time to really sort out. But like, obviously, there is something there that is unique, right? Like, I don't know. There's always been a kind of really disturbing cynicism at the heart of evangelicalism. We talked to Tad DeLay a long time ago about this, and I think that he's right. It's like evangelicals would vote for the devil if the devil promised to do whatever they told them, or whatever he told them, etc. So like, that part precedes Donald Trump, but I think it's just that sort of saying the quiet part out loud thing or something. Like, there's something about Trump that certainly, I don't know, lends permission or legitimacy to things that might have been quiet or might have been, I don't know, kind of subterranean or something. Or it's like it's the release of the id of evangelicalism in a public way, or however you want to put it. I don't know. But all that to say, it's like, yeah, we have to find a way to account for Trump, but certainly not by seeing him as, he may be a turning point historically, but not a turning point in terms of like bringing in some kind of unprecedented logic to evangelicalism that wasn't present before.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, Trump is it's like a, it's like a translation machine. It's like, it's a way, it's something that helps all these, conservative evangelicals convert their very bizarre internal desires into external signs, right? And I think that's maybe a way to think about it. And that in turn changes the internal desires, and like it's a whole big downward spiral for sure, but it's all there. I mean, it's an important part of the story, but it's not the story. Okay, so Trump is bad. We got that. But also culture is bad, as it turns out. If you wouldn't have guessed that, probably. So he goes on to talk with a person named Alan Jacobs, who is a quote distinguished professor of humanities in the honors program at Baylor University. Baylor is a Christian school. It's like, of evangelical schools, Baylor is like the research university. So
the Notre Dame of Baptists.
That's right, the Notre Dame of Baptists. So this is what Alan Jacobs, a distinguished professor, says. Culture catechizes. Culture teaches us what matters and what views we should take about what matters. Our current political culture, Jacobs argued, has multiple technologies and platforms for catechizing, which are television, radio, Facebook, Twitter, and podcasts, among them. That's it. People who want to be connected to their political tribe, the people, again, get a new word, my guy. The people they think that they're like them, the people who they think are on their side, they subject themselves to its catechesis all day long, every single day, hour after hour. So that's what Alan Jacobs is adding here too. So there's this Donald Trump guy for sure, but then also there are all of these media platforms that catechize people into thinking a particular way. I think it's very ironic that for a guy who is trying to say that evangelicalism has never been political, he chooses a political word to talk about. Or I'm sorry, he chooses a religious word to talk about the politicization of people's minds. That's pretty great.
And an extremely evangelical one, right? The that dastardly culture sneaking in to tear you away.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, he says, this is more from Alan Jacobs. On the flip side, many churches aren't interested in catechesis at all. They focus instead on entertainment because entertainment is what keeps people in their seats and coins in the offering plate. So the quote from Alan Jacobs goes on to say, so if people are getting one kind of catechesis for half an hour per week and another for dozens of hours per week, which one do you think will win out? So this like explanation of culture is very funny because I mean the meta view here is that the problem comes down to one of a strong culture and a really weak church, to which like the solution is just like, well, you got to just make the church stronger. Um, and there are a lot of like very weird assumptions kind of bound up in this particular view of culture, like um, that culture that culture precedes politics, right? That's like what comes first here. Culture is the bad thing, like giving people all these weird political views. It also assumes that like evangelicalism has no inherent political inclination within sort of its structure. It's again just culture is jamming those political views down your throat through Facebook or whatever, which is true in some ways, but also very untrue in other ways. And then finally, I think that also assumes that like what evangelicalism is doing now is like it's a break, it's an aberration, it's not the church as it's supposed to be, right? It's this is the church waning and the culture kind of growing stronger, um, and it should be the other way around. I think is maybe the assumption here. So there's, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of stuff going on here that is all, I think, extremely strange. I don't know. It's just such a really unusable idea of culture. Um, it's a lot of words that are kind of right in some ways, but really no overarching theory to kind of knit these things together. These are just more buzzwords. I feel like they're being thrown at me.
For sure. I mean, it's also I don't know. It's because there's this kind of stark differentiation between culture and evangelicalism. It just enables maybe an easy heuristic device that doesn't
Mhm.
really let you figure out what's going on. And the trouble is like there's a moment of truth, which is to say whatever your pastor says in their sermon on Sunday is not going to compete with like whatever Tucker Carlson says every night on Fox News, right? Like
Yeah.
you can have the best pastor in the world, but like you're just not going to beat that kind of formation, and that's true. I mean, accurate. What a great postmodern point,
Mhm.
right? The postmoderns were right all along. Foucault was right. You're going to be formed by these discourses around you way more than you're going to be formed by the intentional half-hour sermon of your Bible believing pastor. At the same time, though, like Tucker Carlson and people like him don't emerge in a vacuum, right? Like they also are sort of propped up by an evangelical hegemony, which again Weiner would know all about, having been around during the rise of the moral majority and so on. So I think it's frustrating because it's like it's true. A church, even the best church, cannot compete with kind of the average way in which people go about the world. But at the same time, like it doesn't really take into account the fact that evangelicalism has been creating the conditions for those culture. Like it's not just the case that evangelicalism creates entertainment. Like entertainment is also, I don't know, like
It's
profoundly bound
catechizing.
up in. Yeah, exactly. Like it's catechizing. It's I don't know, like the way in which that we try to like think through how our culture, I don't know, changes our opinion and so on. Like you can just imagine Peter Weiner sitting at home and like not appreciating a like Coca-Cola commercial about diversity, right? Which it's like, yeah, Coca-Cola is bad, but like I don't know, the way that it's catechizing people and so on. My guess is if you're like a weird conservative, you're gonna take away all the exactly wrong measures, and you're just gonna develop the same kind of paranoia that like
Yeah.
evangelicals have always had about the boogeyman of whatever critical race theory or something else.
hmm Yeah, I mean, in this past year, since the George Floyd uprising this last year, there has been a record amount of money, like ad money, spent on including diversity campaigns
Right.
within major advertising or whatever, right? So of course, there's a lot for these folks to be mad about, I guess. But like, I mean, on the other hand, the particular culture they're talking about here, the one that makes people like angry or that creates the culture of grievance within the church. I mean, for a large in a large way, like if you're taking in conservative media on Facebook or on I don't know, OAN or whatever, like in a big way, you are consuming the culture that evangelicalism has created, right? Like you said, these things don't happen in a bubble. Evangelicalism enables a lot of this, this type of comportment towards the world, and to not recognize that is very bizarre. Again, like
Yeah.
you think of them as these great spheres that are disconnected. I guess this is what you get, but I don't know. Evangelicalism is really bound up in conservative culture in ways that you can't easily disentangle or just say like, well, they're separate. So I don't know.
Yeah,
It's weird.
it is weird. One really weird thing too about this article is like the one voice that comes through in here that is good and worth listening to is Kristen Kobes-Dumé,
Yeah.
who if you don't know, she's cool. She wrote the book Jesus and John Wayne. I don't know. We should get her on the podcast sometime if she has time. Actually, you can listen to a cool interview with her at a podcast from the school that I went to, the Institute for Christian Studies, called the podcast is called Critical Faith. She did a cool interview with them about Donald Trump and how it relates to her work. But anyway, Weiner is interviewing all these people, George Marsden, Alan Jacobs, etc. So he interviews Kristen Kobes-Dumé, and she has I think the only like voice of reason in the entire article, which is she has done all this research on evangelicalism and what it has produced, and her thesis is that Trumpism is not a total aberration, right? You can kind of understand it as a fruit of evangelicalism, not a betrayal of it, and so on. And the weirdest thing about it is like he quotes her and allows her to say what she says, but like immediately forgets everything that she told him. She talks about how evangelicalism is, formed by this opposition toward I guess an affirmation of very bad ideas about gender, about race, and so on, right? And like this has always been the case. She does a really good job kind of pulling that out, even in these quotations. And she also talks about how like evangelicals always want to talk about the Bible, how they're biblical, and how like culture is out to get you, right? Like she's basically calling out other parts of the article in her own sort of piece. But yeah, it just is totally lost on Weiner. So I don't know how that happened either, but it's a very weird contradiction in the article.
It is. There's a larger rhetorical thing going on here that I think is actually really fascinating with Kristen Kobes-Dumé. Is like because of the popularity of her book, which I haven't read, which is a mistake of mine, I think. But the popularity of her book means that like she is a person that I think like conservative and evangelical Christians are starting to like. They have to kind of treat her work seriously because it's popular, because it's like actively critiquing them, and as they're doing this whole kind of dance of like rehabilitating themselves, it seems like that's something they have to deal with like in a serious way, right? So you see people like the rise and fall of Mars Hill, they bring her on the show too to talk about whatever, Mark Driscoll, and about how he's like a scumbag. And you see her come up here too. And in each of these cases, like they refer to her as like a source that they can draw from to kind of to be introspective and to learn about maybe like what's bad about them. But at the end of the day, like her critique is probably is too scathing, so they have to kind of just like write her off in one way or another. And it must be maddening to just be like cited by all of these people but not taken seriously, and I hate that for her. It makes me really frustrated. But like you see her come up time and time again, and she ends up becoming like she becomes like a prop in the room to say like, look, we are actually really considering what's bad about evangelicalism, because look, we've talked about this book. But really no evangelicals are really considering it, because if they did, they'd have to like not be evangelicals anymore. Okay. Great. Let's talk about the conclusion and really drive this point home. The conclusion is this: something has gone amiss. Pastors know it as well as anyone, and better than most. The Jesus of the Gospels, the Jesus who has won their hearts and who long ago won mine, needs to be reclaimed. Period. So the conclusion of the article is the conclusion that evangelicals, it's the only conclusion that evangelicals can ever get to. You just got to get Jesus back at the center of everything. And that's unsurprising. And also it's extremely frustrating, because you can't, as a person outside looking in, you can just see sort of the wheels of evangelicalism spinning like they're a car stuck in the mud. It's always just sort of like more of the same. Really, we just need Jesus at the center of it. We just need to get back, just like you said, Dean, get back to the heart of worship. And like that's the thing that's going to fix all of this, like of the rotten culture and like the the culture of grievances, and like, I mean, well, it's way worse than that, but that just concluding that like really we just need to get back to the core of our religion is such a frustrating thing to hear somebody say when considering evangelicalism, because that's the only thing evangelicals can say. Like, that's the bottom of every critique they can have, because if they were to say something else, evangelicalism is wrong, whatever, right, it kind of undoes the whole movement. um it displaces the individual in Jesus within within the grand cosmology here, and it is so frustrating because like this is it. This is the only critique that evangelicals can ever really give. And this, that you can't get past this. They're going to recreate the same problem every single time. That, you know, there's something that bad that happens within this whole way of thinking. And no, it's not actually us that's wrong. It's our corrupt churches. It's our culture. It's all of these political things that are happening. We just really need to get back to Jesus. And they can't ever recognize that maybe the particular way they believe in Jesus is exactly their problem. But that's why it's so frustrating to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's you see the same thing with like the way that he talks about the Bible in here as well, right? That if we just go back to a kind of biblical Christianity, everything will be fine. But like that's exactly the problem, right? Is there are like legions of pastors in the United States who will tell you that like being a good biblical Christian means voting for Donald Trump, right? And I don't know, like those are the same people who said being a good biblical Christian means voting for George W. Bush, you know, and on down the line. And I think it's like it's really telling that this is the one kind of I don't know how to put it, like this is always the defense mechanism rather than the liberating mechanism of evangelicalism, right? It's like you just sort of cling to those two things, the biblical truth that is like overly simple, right? A kind of childish way of reading the Bible. And then you cling to a vision of Jesus that actually doesn't really open you up to an encounter with like what's happening with Jesus in the Bible or in the Gospels or whatever, but actually closes down any way of understanding, like, I don't know, how maybe like if you tried to take Jesus seriously again or something, you would find that you shouldn't be creating like conservative think tanks, right? Like there's this kind of wild way in which Jesus becomes the shield that you use to actually avoid even encountering those radical parts of the Christian tradition, right? So without trying to say there's a true Christianity underneath evangelicalism, I think it's important to recognize too that the Weiner strategy here of being like, we just got to get back to the Bible is exactly the kind of strategy that is just gonna, I don't know, like put you right back on track to have this contradiction emerge again and again and again over and over. It's like it's baked into it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I like the way that you put it, though, that you make Jesus into a shield that like ends up guarding the whole system of oppression that keeps you kind of in this mode. You know, you don't think about the ways that, you know, your particular hermeneutic project or whatever has like created extremely bad desires in you, or the way that you like blindly accept some kind of like weird political orthodoxy um surrounding conservatism. Those things are off the table. It just always has to be about Jesus and kind of like whatever. And for that reason, you'll be locked in this kind of forever. It
Right.
is right now I'm convincing myself how important deconstruction is, I guess. Maybe with some heavy qualifications, with an asterisk and a thousand paragraphs after. But still, I mean, I get why people kind of who are emerging from evangelicalism kind of go through that process of taking things apart, and how messy that could possibly be, because like you concede that you get locked in this kind of mode of thinking, and you
Yeah.
can't escape unless you really like disavow some things.
Yeah, I think so. I said at the beginning of the episode, I also have like a soft spot for some evangelicals, and maybe this is where it comes out too, because, you know, like I said, I was an evangelical once. Maybe I'm just trying to save my own ego or something, but like, I think a lot of like rank and file evangelicals are like painfully earnest, literally to a fault. Like, you know, they are like trying their best to live out a system of thinking that is like contradictory through and through. Like, paradoxical in the worst possible way, right? It's like a bunch of stuff that cannot go together, but nevertheless you're like forced to make it go together in your life, and it creates all kinds of problems, like psychological problems, relationship problems, theological problems, whatever they might be, right? And especially political ones. And I have a soft spot for people who are like genuinely at odds with it, whether it's like they were born in an evangelical family and are trying to figure it out, or like, whatever, they found it later on and so on. I think because I just remember what it was like to be like, well, I believe the Bible is the ultimate truth and there's like nothing wrong with it. And when you start taking that seriously, you end up with weird opinions, like maybe kings are bad, maybe all leaders are bad, and so on, right? And there is a kind of tradition of progressive evangelicalism that I do think kind of falls outside of like the Trumpy stuff. Like, there's kind of a way of articulating evangelicalism that gets outside of that, but like it is profoundly minoritarian. And if you ask me, also profoundly confused. It's like my sympathies are not an admission of like, and also it's like a very good thing in the world, I guess, so much as it's like, I get that like life is hard and figuring out what to do with it is hard. And like, I get it, but that's all. More empathy maybe than sympathy. I don't know. It's hard to figure out, but evangelicalism is weird.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's true. Evangelicalism is weird, and there is maybe a progressive type of evangelicalism. Like you said, I mean, I guess there must be, because we've both kind of gone through it. But at the same time, you have to recognize how those conditions have to be just right. It's an impossible needle to thread. Were you a teenager in 2008? Did you go to Cornerstone?
Yeah.
All of those things you have to have just so, or else you're going to get stuck and you're going to be a George Bush forever kind of person.
Right. Well, and also like neither of us are evangelicals now, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
It is what it is.
Well, I mean, I don't know. To me, I mean, this is my own wild speculation. I mean, there are currently people who are evangelicals and are like progressive people, like, I don't know, Jim Wallace or whatever, right? But at the same time, to me, like evangelicalism, like sort of like the left evangelical wing or progressive evangelicalism, however you want to frame that, it always seems like a line of flight away from evangelicalism, right? The progressive evangelical to Episcopalian pipeline is a real one. But yeah, I don't know. It's a complicated assemblage of like moving pieces in people's brains. And it is tough for sure. You're right.
Yeah, I guess here's one trivia piece you can get out of this podcast episode that is not related to anything that we're talking about. The coolest evangelical in the world is Juan Stam, who died not so long ago. But we've talked about him a little bit on the show in the past. But he went to Wheaton and then moved to Costa Rica and became an evangelical liberation theologian. And he was like friends with all the cool guys. He taught Fidel Castro how to read the Book of Revelation, just like a wild character. So anyway, there's one good evangelical in the world. His name is Juan Stam. And I don't know, you can go down the rabbit hole with him, I guess. That's it. That's the one piece of trivia you can go. There's an evangelical liberation theologian out there.
It's good trivia. He would be completely unidentifiable to the evangelicals that we're talking about in this article, but that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, and I point him out because he's from the United States, because just to make another big asterisk, I guess, actually, like, in Latin America, there are a ton of evangelicals that are like genuinely progressive and cool.
Yeah.
There's lots of bad ones too, but lots of there's like a different expression of evangelicalism that can lead people to be like supportive of Hugo Chavez, for example, or whatever. Like, it's a different situation. But Juan Stam is from the U.S., so that's why I'm singling him out.
Well, it's 59 minutes into this episode, so it's a good time to say, yeah, we did just mean American evangelicals only in this whole conversation. North American evangelicals, I guess, to be inclusive. I'm sure there's a bunch of
and excluding Mexico.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we should have said that 59 minutes ago, but listen, we can't. We can't go back in time. If only we had something that we could use to kind of like cut and chop and screw our audio, but we don't. There's nothing like that exists, so we'll just have to kind of put it here at the end.
That's right. And what a great note to end on, with an admission of failure and technological inability. That feels right. If you like this podcast, and we know that you did, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. And if you do that, you can join a Discord where people are talking all the time about this and other stuff. You can listen to another podcast that we do semi-regularly called The Lock-In, where we talk about current events and do dumb jokes and so on. Our music is by Amaria Armstrong, and our outro is by The Illogical Spoon. We'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive, heaven come come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Least I would have